We are living through the fastest technological acceleration in recorded history. Machines can now write, reason, negotiate, diagnose, and predict. They can hold a conversation, read your emotional state, and adjust their language to match what you need to hear. And in the middle of all that, the one thing that remains stubbornly, irreducibly valuable is something that has not changed in 200,000 years: the human brain. Not its processing power, not its raw intelligence, its wiring for connection, for belonging, for reading the air in a room before a single word is spoken. The skills that are going to matter most in the years ahead are not the ones a machine can replicate. They are the ones that live in the space between two people when they are genuinely paying attention to each other. That space is what this is about. Here is what nobody tells you about the most persuasive people in the world. They are also, by a considerable margin, the most easily persuaded. The attorney who can shift a jury's perception in 40 minutes goes home and makes the same 3 financial decisions he always regrets. The hostage negotiator who can talk someone off a ledge with nothing but calibrated language still gets baited into the same argument with his partner every time a certain topic comes up. The behavior expert who has mapped the architecture of human influence for 20 years still nods along when someone opens a conversation with a frame he knows, consciously was designed to anchor his response before he had a chance to form one. This is not irony. This is the mechanism. The part of the brain that processes incoming information and begins constructing a response does not wait for permission. It does not pause and ask whether you would like to weigh the evidence. By the time the slower, deliberate part of your cognition has even registered that a conversation is happening, the faster layer has already cataloged tone, posture, prior context, emotional charge, and social stakes, and has already begun nudging behavior in a direction. What you experience as a decision is frequently a narration of something that was already set in motion. The sequence is always the same. First, perception shifts. The frame of a situation is established, not by what is said, but by what is made available to notice. Then context locks in. Once you know what kind of scene this is, a negotiation, a threat, a safe conversation, a performance, behavior becomes almost automatic. What is permissible here? What does this kind of situation call for? And from that, permission emerges, not as a conscious green light, but as the quiet removal of a barrier. The behavior flows. Think about a man walking into a boardroom for an important meeting. He is prepared. He knows what he wants to accomplish. He walks in, exchanges the usual pleasantries, weather, travel, nothing, and sits down. Within the first 4 minutes, before any agenda item has been touched, someone else in the room has named what this meeting is for. Someone else has set the frame. And without realizing it, without any explicit pressure, our prepared man has accepted that frame. He will spend the next 90 minutes working within a structure he did not choose. He will leave the meeting wondering why it felt like he was always slightly behind the conversation. He will attribute it to preparation, to chemistry, to the other party being difficult. He will not think to examine the first 4 minutes, because the first 4 minutes were invisible. The most precise description of what happened in that boardroom is not about tactics. It is about the way the brain manages cost. Deliberate, conscious reasoning is expensive. It burns energy. It is slow. It requires holding multiple possibilities in tension without collapsing into a conclusion prematurely. Your brain, built for an environment where hesitation had physical consequences, has evolved an enormous preference for the faster route. Pattern recognition, prior context, emotional signal. If the current situation resembles something familiar, the faster processing layer knows what to do, and it does it immediately, before the deliberate layer has even been consulted. This is not a flaw in design, it is the design. The same mechanism that kept your ancestors alive in genuinely dangerous environments is the mechanism that decides before you do how you feel about the person who just walked into the room, what this conversation is about, whether the situation is safe or threatening, whether you are valued here or marginal. It does all of this in fractions of a second, and it does it using whatever information has been made most available. This is where the architecture of influence lies. Not in the obvious move, the hard sell, the direct ask, the explicit argument. The real leverage point is what gets made available to notice before the argument begins. A piece of information here. A reframing of context there. A small act of compliance, then another, each one individually meaningless, collectively rerouting the entire trajectory of where someone ends up. A hypnotist gets someone to lay down unconscious in 90 seconds, not through force, not through superior intelligence, but through a cascade of 50 small requests, none of which matter on their own, all of which together have trained the other person's faster processing layer to follow. When the final suggestion arrives, it feels natural, because by then the pattern is already established. Social media engineers understand this. Political operatives understand this. Cult recruiters understand this, the novelty that hijacks attention, the authority figure that commands focus before the message is even delivered. The tribe signal, here is what everyone is doing, here is what this group believes, that makes a particular behavior feel like the obvious natural thing, and then the emotion. The feeling that arrives after the pattern has been assembled, which the deliberate mind experiences as a reaction, but which was in fact the destination all along. The brain has not developed one new wrinkle in 200,000 years. These are ancient circuits being run in contemporary environments. And the distance between what we think we are doing and what is actually happening is, for most people, most of the time, genuinely enormous. If you feel something pull at your attention right now, stay with it. But here is where the map becomes more unsettling, because everything described so far could still be filed under external influence, the manipulation out there, the forces that operate on us from the environment. You can hear all of that and still maintain a comfortable separation. They do this to people, not to me. The same circuits, the same sequence, the same invisible architecture. It runs inside too. There is a woman in a meeting. She has something worth saying. She has thought about it carefully. She knows the room. She knows the subject. She knows her position. And then something happens, not to her argument, not to her information, but to her body. Her throat tightens slightly. The impulse to speak arrives and then recedes very fast before anyone noticed it was there. She adjusts in her chair. She waits. The moment passes. Someone else says something adjacent to what she was going to say, less precise, less developed, and the conversation moves forward without her contribution. If you asked her afterward, she might describe it as reading the room, or not wanting to interrupt, or deciding it wasn't the right moment. She would not say, "I am following a contract I wrote when I was 8 years old, sitting at a dinner table where speaking up led to consequences that my child brain cataloged as dangerous." She would not say, "The script I developed to stay safe in that environment is still running, and it fired before I had any chance to override it. But that is what happened." Every human being arrives in adulthood carrying 3 sets of instructions that were written long before they had the language to evaluate them. Instructions for how to earn and keep friends. Instructions for how to stay safe. Instructions for what kind of behavior gets rewarded. These were not developed through reflection. They were developed through urgency, a child figuring out as fast as possible what works in the environment she is living in. And because they worked, because the patterns held, they became automatic. They went into the backpack. And the child became an adult and carried the backpack into every room she ever entered, including the boardroom, including the negotiation, including the relationship, including the conversation where she almost said something important and then didn't. What you call your authentic self is in large part a costume of those early patterns, the way you handle conflict, the way you respond to authority, the way you contract when you feel unvalued or expand when you feel seen, the leadership style you perform instead of inhabit, the kind of attention you crave in a room. All of it traceable, if you go back far enough, to a child who needed to solve a very specific problem in a very specific environment, and solved it efficiently with the tools available at the time. The contract still holds, even when the environment that required it no longer exists. 90% of people are walking through their adult lives governed by instructions they never consciously agreed to, and the uncomfortable part is not that this is happening. The uncomfortable part is that knowing it does not automatically change it. This is where most conversations about influence and behavior take a particular turn. They arrive at a set of techniques, a framework, a model with letters that stand for something. As if the gap between the automatic and the deliberate could be closed by acquiring the right information, the right structure, the right sequence of steps to follow, and something worth sitting with. That desire itself for the framework, for the model, for the clean set of tools is the same mechanism at work. The faster processing layer encountering a problem that produces anxiety immediately reaches for a familiar solution shape, a plan, a protocol, a way of feeling competent in the face of something that does not yield to competence alone. The person who learns every technique of perception shifting and context setting and identity anchoring, and then deploys those techniques to appear influential rather than to genuinely connect, has simply added a more sophisticated layer to the performance. The script is now more polished. The costume is more convincing. But the distance between what is visible and what is actually happening has not closed. It has, if anything, grown wider because now there is a story available. I understand this. I have studied it. I know what is going on. That makes it harder to notice the gap. Real authority does not look like any single archetype. It does not look like the performance of confidence or the mimicry of a leader you admire. It does not broadcast. It resonates. There is a quality to the people who genuinely hold a room that is not about volume or precision or technique. It is about the sense, which arrives almost physically, that this person is not managing the distance between what they show and what they are. Something is aligned. The language matches the body. The frame they set feels like it came from somewhere real, not from a playbook. That alignment is not a skill you acquire. It is a gap you close, slowly and perfectly, without ever fully arriving, between the identity you perform and the one that was there before the performing started. And the only way to close it even partially is to slow down long enough to notice what is automatic, not to eliminate it. You cannot eliminate it. The contracts written in childhood are not deletable files. They are grooves. They will keep activating. What changes is not the groove, but the moment between activation and action, the fraction of a second where something in you recognizes, this is the old script, this is the pattern, this is the 8-year-old solving a problem that the adult does not have anymore. That recognition is not a technique, it is a practice. It is the friction of pausing deliberately in the places where the faster layer wants to move fast. It requires above everything else the willingness to be wrong about yourself. Not once, not in a single revelation, but repeatedly in small ways in ordinary moments, without needing it to mean something dramatic about who you are. The most dangerous illusion in any conversation, with a jury, with a partner, with a team, with yourself, is the certainty that you know what is happening. That certainty is almost always the faster layer covering its tracks. If the patterns described here have pulled something up in you that you recognize, not as an idea, but as something lived, this channel keeps returning to the mechanics of how people actually behave versus how they imagine they do. Subscribe if that kind of examination is worth staying close to. Leave a comment if something landed differently than you expected. These conversations grow in the direction of what people actually want to keep thinking about. Now, before the faster layer decides this conversation is already filed and finished, you are inside one of these patterns right now, not as a concept, as a living condition. The way you receive this information, what you accepted immediately, and what you quietly resisted, what made you nod and what made you want to argue, all of that was the mechanism operating. Not in someone else, in you. The question is not whether the invisible script is running. The question is how much of a gap you are willing to build between the moment it fires and the moment you move. That gap is not comfortable, but everything that matters seems to live inside it.